I always believed love was something that didn't need to be earned, something freely given between family. But as I grew older, I realized my parents didn't see it that way. To them, love was a transaction, and I was the debt they intended to collect. My name is Lucy, and this is the story of how I learned that some debts aren't meant to be repaid, they're meant to be erased. Growing up, our small two-story home always looked perfect from the outside. Polished walls, trimmed hedges, flowers neatly arranged by the front gate. But inside it was a different world, one built on guilt, obligation, and control. My parents, Raymond and Cecilia, prided themselves on being self-made. My father often said, "Nothing in life comes free," as though that excused every cruel word or manipulative act that followed. When I was a child, I used to think it was wisdom. As an adult, I realized it was a warning. From the moment I turned 12, I started to understand the unspoken rule of our house. Everything had a price. My mother would keep receipts from grocery runs and call them life investments. My father would remind me how expensive school was, not out of pride, but as a reminder that I owed them for being there. Whenever I wanted to join a club, buy a book, or spend time with friends, the same words echoed through the house. Do you think money grows on trees? Every laugh, every favor, every small kindness came with a silent expectation of repayment later. But I wasn't ungrateful. I studied hard. I did the chores they asked for. I helped my mom with dinner, cleaned up after my dad's outbursts, and kept my head down. My grades were my pride, the one thing that belonged entirely to me. I was top of my class in debate and known for my strong sense of justice. I dreamed of becoming a lawyer, someone who could fight for fairness because fairness didn't exist in my own home. The day I received a full scholarship to a law university was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I came home beaming, holding the letter like a trophy. "Mom, Dad, I did it," I said, my voice trembling with excitement. "They're covering everything, tuition, housing, books." My mother's smile was brief, fading as quickly as it appeared. "So you think you don't need us anymore?" she asked, her tone sharp. My father glanced up from his newspaper and scoffed. "Don't forget who raised you, Lucy. You wouldn't be standing there if not for us. Don't get too proud." That night, instead of celebrating, I cried quietly in my room. The scholarship I worked so hard for had turned into another reason for them to feel owed. It was as if every success I earned made them angrier that I was slipping beyond their control. 4 years passed. I lived on campus, worked part-time at a cafe, and sent money home whenever I could, though they never said thank you. Each call with them was a subtle guilt trip. "Your cousin just bought her parents a new TV. What about you? Do you know how much it cost us to feed you for 18 years? You'll understand when you have children." When I graduated with honors, I didn't even expect them to come to the ceremony. But they did. Not out of pride, but performance. My mother wore her most expensive dress, parading through the crowd like a queen. My father shook hands with my professors and said loudly, "We always told Lucy to aim high. She learned from the best." I stood there, smiling for photos, pretending I hadn't overheard them arguing in the parking lot about how I owed them everything for this moment. After graduation, I landed an internship at a prestigious law firm in the city. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. Long hours, intense work, but incredible potential. I decided to move closer to the office, away from the suffocating grip of home. I was 23 and ready to start my own life. When I told my parents about the move, I expected a bittersweet goodbye. Instead, my father leaned back in his chair and smiled in a way that made my stomach twist. "So, you think you can just walk away after everything we've done for you?" I frowned. "Dad, it's not like that. Just what?" He interrupted. "Just leaving your parents behind? After we paid for your food, your clothes, your school, your entire life?" I laughed softly, thinking it was one of his usual guilt trips. "I had a scholarship, remember?" My mother slammed her hand on the table. "A scholarship doesn't cover diapers, electricity, or your doctor bills when you were a child. You think those came out of thin air?" Then she reached for something, a small brown notebook. She slid it across the table toward me. I flipped it open. Inside were pages filled with numbers, neat, organized, itemized. Rent, groceries, school supplies, medical costs, birthday gifts. Every single line had a dollar amount next to it. At the bottom, circled in red ink, was a total $86,000. I froze. What is this? I whispered. It's what you owe us, my father said matter-of-factly. We kept track all these years. Raising a child isn't free, Lucy. You think you're grown now? Fine, be an adult. Pay your debt like one. My breath caught in my throat. I looked between them, expecting one of them to laugh, to say it was a joke. But they didn't. My mother crossed her arms. If you can afford your own apartment, you can afford to repay your parents. I felt heat rush to my face. Anger, disbelief, heartbreak all tangled together. You're serious, I said. My father nodded slowly. That's what good daughters do. That night, I sat in my old bedroom surrounded by packed boxes. The air felt heavy, suffocating. I stared at the walls that had witnessed my entire life. Every tear, every small victory, every painful silence. I thought about the years I spent trying to make them proud, the nights I studied under a flickering lamp, the mornings I skipped breakfast so they wouldn't have to worry about groceries. I thought love meant sacrifice. But to them, sacrifice was a bill waiting to be paid. For the first time in my life, I saw them clearly. Not as parents, but as creditors. And I was their lifelong debtor. Something inside me hardened that night. Not hatred, but resolve. I didn't yell or cry or plead for understanding. I simply closed that notebook, placed it back on the table, and said quietly, "Okay, if that's how you want it, we'll settle this. Like adults." My father smirked, thinking he'd won. My mother looked smug, certain she'd guilted me into submission. But inside, I was already planning something far bigger. The next morning, I packed the rest of my things. My mother didn't help. My father stood by the door, arms crossed. "Don't forget what you owe," he said coldly. I smiled faintly. "Don't worry, Dad. I'll make sure the debt is settled." I walked out of that house and didn't look back. As the taxi pulled away, I watched the only home I'd ever known fade into the distance. Not with sadness, but with strange relief. It was like stepping out of a cage I didn't realize I was trapped in. In the days that followed, I moved into a small apartment near my new job. It wasn't much. One bedroom, peeling paint, leaky faucet, but it was mine. I bought my own furniture, made my own meals, and paid every bill with my own name on it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living under anyone's shadow. But late at night, as I stared at the city lights from my tiny balcony, their words would still echo in my mind. "You owe us for raising you." I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that one day, they'd come calling for their debt again. And when they did, I'd be ready, because I was no longer their obedient daughter. I was a woman who had learned the true meaning of value, and someday soon I would show them what debt really means. The first few years after leaving home felt like crawling out of quicksand. Every step forward came with resistance, the weight of my parents' words still clinging to me like chains. I didn't have much when I moved into my apartment. A secondhand couch, a flickering lamp, and a heart full of bruises. But I had something stronger than resentment, resolve. I promised myself I would never again let anyone use guilt to own me. At the law firm, I was the youngest and the least connected. Everyone else seemed to come from money, from families that celebrated achievement instead of weaponizing it. I was quiet but ruthless with my work. I'd arrive before dawn, reviewing case files while the office lights still buzzed faintly, and I'd leave long after the janitors had mopped the marble floors. Colleagues whispered that I was obsessive, and maybe I was. Every late night, every extra case, every exhausting week was powered by a memory. My mother's voice saying, "You owe us." For years, I'd been conditioned to think I was indebted to them. But now I realized that debt could be a weapon, and I was going to master it. 3 years passed in a blur of coffee cups, contracts, and courtroom battles. By 26, I wasn't the timid intern who used to stutter when partners addressed her. I was sharp, cold, and deliberate. I had become the kind of person who understood how power truly worked, not through shouting, but through signatures, paper trails, and silence. One Monday morning, while reviewing a complex corporate foreclosure case, I found myself thinking about that night at the kitchen table, the ridiculous $86,000 debt notebook my parents made me look at. It had been years, but the memory still burned. They'd tallied up my childhood like it was a business transaction. I smiled bitterly. How fitting it was that I now specialized in contracts and debt law. The very thing they used to control me had become my weapon of choice. Then fate, as cruel and poetic as it can be, handed me the perfect opportunity. I was working late one evening when my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't saved, but I knew it instantly. My father. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 2 years. I hesitated before answering. "Lucy." His voice cracked through the speaker, low and strained. We need your help." I leaned back in my chair. "What kind of help?" He hesitated, and for the first time in my life, my father sounded uncertain, almost afraid. "The bank," he said. "They're threatening to take the house. We fell behind on the payments. It's over 100,000. We're going to lose everything." For a long moment, I said nothing. I could hear my mother crying faintly in the background. The same woman who once said, "If you can afford to move out, you can afford to repay us." It was poetic. The universe had finally flipped the ledger. "I'll come by tomorrow," I said calmly. "We'll talk." The next morning, I drove back to my hometown. The roads felt both familiar and foreign, as though the world I'd left behind was shrinking in the rearview mirror. When I pulled up to the house, I almost didn't recognize it. The once perfectly trimmed hedges were overgrown, and the white paint faded and cracked. My father was waiting at the door, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. My mother came out moments later, smiling weakly as if nothing had ever happened. "Lucy," she said, her voice trembling. "You look successful." "I manage," I replied flatly. I walked inside. The air smelled the same, lemon cleaner and old furniture. But it felt different, smaller. I was no longer the scared daughter who counted every breath before speaking. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where they'd once handed me that cursed notebook. My father cleared his throat. "The bank said they'll foreclose next month if we don't pay. We tried everything. We even asked your uncle, but—" "I see," I interrupted. I opened my laptop and began typing. My mother tilted her head, hopeful. "You're a lawyer now," she said, forcing a small smile. "You can fix this, right? For family?" The irony nearly made me laugh. Family, a word they'd used as a weapon all my life. I looked up and met her eyes. "Of course," I said smoothly. "But if we're doing this, I want everything official." They exchanged a glance. My father frowned. "What do you mean?" I turned the screen toward them. "I'll pay off your debt, but in exchange, you'll sign this." On the document was a property transfer agreement, clean, precise, legally binding. It stated that in return for my settling the mortgage, full ownership of the house would transfer to my name. My mother blinked. "Lucy, that's not necessary. You're our daughter," I smiled faintly. "You once told me good daughters pay their debts. I'm just returning the favor." My father hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "If this is what it takes to keep the bank away, fine." "Hand it over," I watched as they signed. The pens scratched across the paper, sealing their own fate. They didn't even read the clauses. Years of arrogance and habit had taught them to underestimate me. As I collected the papers, I caught my reflection in the window. Calm, composed, but burning inside. The same house that had been a prison would now become my property. The same parents who'd demanded payment for raising me were unknowingly repaying their own debt. Within a week, I wired the money and cleared their bank records. The foreclosure was canceled. I received the deed in my name. Simple, elegant, final. When I visited again, they were cheerful, relieved. My mother hugged me for the first time in years. "You saved us," she whispered. "You really came through." I smiled, but my eyes stayed cold. Of course. Family helps family. They had no idea. In the months that followed, I kept my distance. I checked the house's market value, consulted a few realtors, and quietly made plans. I wasn't rushing revenge. That wasn't my style. I wanted them to feel safe, comfortable, even grateful, before the truth arrived. Meanwhile, work at the firm only intensified. My reputation grew. I was no longer the quiet, obedient associate. I was a strategist, the one who could dismantle an opponent without raising her voice. I'd won cases that even senior partners avoided. People said I was coldly brilliant. They didn't know that brilliance was forged from emotional survival. One evening, while preparing for a deposition, I received a text from my mother. "Dinner on Sunday? We'd love to have you." "We miss you." I almost laughed. Miss me? The woman who once told me affection had a price now wanted to play the doting mother. But I accepted. There was something I needed to see for myself. Something I needed to feel before ending this chapter of my life. When I arrived that Sunday, the table was neatly set, the house cleaned as though they expected royalty. My mother served my favorite dish, pasta with creamy garlic sauce. My father poured wine. For 2 hours, they spoke to me like normal parents, pretending the years of manipulation had never happened. It was surreal, the calm before the storm. As we talked, my father mentioned, "We're finally catching up on our finances thanks to you. We even thought of refinancing again. Maybe open a small business. You've been such a blessing." I swirled the wine in my glass and smiled politely. That's great news. Inside, I was already picturing the look on their faces when they discovered the truth. I hadn't decided exactly when to reveal it, but I knew I would. Not out of spite, but as a lesson, because parents who treat love as a debt deserve to understand what repayment feels like. That night, when I left, my mother hugged me again. "You've grown into such a strong woman," she said softly. "We're proud of you," I didn't reply. Strength, after all, was the one thing they hadn't given me. It was what I'd built in the ruins they left behind. As I drove back to the city, the papers sat quietly in my bag. The deed to their house, now mine. Every mile between us felt lighter. I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I was the woman they had unknowingly empowered through their cruelty. And while they slept peacefully in that house, grateful and unaware, I was already drafting my next move, the final act that would balance every line in the ledger they started the day they said I owed them. Because in life, debts aren't always settled in money. Sometimes they're settled in lessons, and soon they were going to learn what debt truly meant. When I woke up that morning, the air felt heavy, still and expectant, like the world itself knew something irreversible was about to happen. 3 years had passed since I'd first moved out, and 6 months since my parents had unknowingly signed away their home. The legal clock had run its course. The house, their pride and weapon of control, was now fully and undeniably mine. I had waited for this moment, not out of malice, but out of purpose. They had built my childhood on guilt, turned love into currency, and turned parenting into a transaction. Now it was time to close the account. I drove back to my hometown with the same calmness I carried into every courtroom. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I had long since stopped being the girl who sought their approval. I was the woman they created through their cruelty, composed, strategic, and unflinchingly fair. The roads felt smaller than I remembered, as though my world had grown and theirs had shrunk. When I turned the corner onto their street, the house stood there, faded, weary, and symbolic. The once white paint had yellowed under the sun. The gate hung slightly off its hinge. For so long, this house had been their fortress, a place where their words echoed with authority. Now it was just a structure awaiting closure. When my father opened the door, his expression shifted from surprise to guarded relief. "Lucy," he said, forcing a smile. "We weren't expecting you. Come in." My mother's voice called from the kitchen, cheerful but strained. "Lucy, is that really you?" "Oh, honey, it's been ages." I stepped inside. The sound of my heels clicking against the tile floor. Everything looked the same. The same curtains, the same faded family photos, the same air thick with pretense. My mother came forward, wiping her hands on her apron, and for a fleeting second, I almost pitied her. She reached out to hug me, but I didn't move. I simply said, "We need to talk." My father's smile faltered. "What's this about?" I placed the folder on the table. It was thick, neatly bound, every page meticulously labeled. "It's about settling our debt," I said evenly. My mother frowned. "What debt? We already—" "Not mine," I interrupted softly. "Yours." They exchanged confused glances as I slid the first document toward them. "This," I said, tapping the paper, "is a copy of the property transfer agreement you both signed 6 months ago. It clearly states that in exchange for my paying off your bank loan, ownership of this house transfers entirely to me. You both signed it, voluntarily." My father leaned forward, squinting at the paper. "We thought that was temporary," he muttered. "We trusted you." "I trusted you too," I replied, my voice sharp enough to cut through the silence. "When I was a child. When I believed love didn't have a price tag. But you taught me otherwise." My mother's lips trembled. "You wouldn't. You wouldn't actually take our home, would you?" I reached into the folder again and pulled out the final page. A formal eviction notice. "According to this," I said, sliding it across the table, "you have 30 days to vacate the property." The color drained from my father's face. "Lucy," he said slowly, disbelief turning to anger. "You can't do this. We're your parents." "Oh, but I can," I said quietly. "And I will." My mother slammed her hand on the table. "How dare you speak to us this way? After everything we've done for you?" I looked her straight in the eyes. "You mean after everything you charged me for? The food, the clothes, the roof over my head? You remember that notebook, don't you? The one where you listed every expense, every dollar, as if I were some stranger renting a room in your house? You said I owed you for being born. So now I'm just paying the bill." She went silent, her eyes darting toward my father. He tried to regain control, his voice booming with forced authority. "This is revenge. That's all this is." "No," I said calmly. "This is balance. You taught me that debts must be paid, that nothing in life comes free. You turned parenting into a business, so let's treat it like one. You wanted repayment. You got it. I paid your mortgage, cleared your debt, and saved your credit. In exchange, I took ownership. That's what adults do, remember? They settle things like adults." My father's jaw clenched. "You think this makes you powerful?" "You'll regret this." I tilted my head slightly. "Maybe. But I'll regret it less than living a life controlled by guilt." My mother began to cry, quiet at first, then louder, the kind of sobbing that once would have shattered me. But now it only echoed hollowly in the room. "We gave you everything," she cried. "How could you be so heartless?" "Everything?" I whispered. "You gave me survival, not love. You gave me lessons in manipulation, not care. You raised me to believe affection was something I had to earn. But you know what? You were right about one thing. Nothing in life is free. So, this is me paying the final installment." I stood and walked toward the door, my hands steady. "You have 30 days. I'll give you that grace." My father's voice broke behind me, sharp with desperation. "Lucy, please, we have nowhere to go." I paused at the doorway, turning just enough to see them both. Two people who had once seemed larger than life, now small, frightened, and fragile. "You'll find somewhere," I said quietly. "You always told me people figure it out when they have to." For a moment, none of us spoke. The ticking clock filled the silence, every second marking the distance between who I was and who I had become. Then I added, "You always said love isn't free. I just proved you right." I left the folder on the table and walked out, the late afternoon sun spilling through the window behind me. The air outside was warm, tinged with the smell of cut grass and fading summer, the same scent that used to mean safety when I was a child. But now it felt like liberation. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, staring at the house. Memories flooded me. Birthdays, punishments, tears, quiet dinners full of unspoken resentment. It had once been the center of my universe. Now it was just a building full of ghosts. As I drove away, I didn't look back. Not once. I felt something uncoil inside me, a tightness that had been there for years, dissolving into the quiet satisfaction of closure. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel cruel. I felt free. Weeks passed. I focused on my work, finalizing the property sale and signing new cases. Every time I opened a file about debt, repayment, or obligation, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. I had become everything they'd accused me of, calculating, pragmatic, unfeeling. But I had also become what they never expected, independent. Then, one evening, I received a letter. No return address, just my name written in shaky handwriting. I recognized it instantly, my mother's. Inside was a single page. Lucy, we moved into a small apartment. It's not much, but it's quiet. Your father hasn't spoken much since that day. I think deep down he knows he pushed you too far. I do too. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that we finally understand what you meant. Love shouldn't be a debt. It should be given freely or not at all. Maybe one day when you're ready we can talk. Mom. I folded the letter and placed it in my drawer. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. But for the first time, I felt something close to peace. They hadn't changed because I demanded it. They changed because life forced them to see the truth. Months later, I visited the house one last time before handing over the keys to the new owners. The walls were empty, the echoes softer. I stood in the living room where my father had once scolded me for dreaming too big, where my mother had tallied my worth in ink and numbers. I whispered to the empty air, "Debt settled." As I stepped out and closed the door behind me, a strange calm washed over me. The house, that symbol of their control, was no longer mine, no longer theirs. It was just another structure in a world full of others. What remained was the lesson. Love is not a transaction. Parenthood is not ownership. And freedom isn't given. It's taken back piece by piece until you finally breathe on your own. That night, I stood on my apartment balcony, watching the city lights shimmer below. Somewhere in that glow, the past faded quietly, replaced by something new. Peace, not revenge. For years they had told me I owed them for raising me. But in the end, it was they who owed me, for teaching me how to be unbreakable. And though I never said it aloud, I hoped, wherever they were, they finally understood the truth. Love given freely is priceless. But love turned into debt will always eventually be collected, with interest.